we've got Ed Mortimer. He's our Vice President of Transportation and Infrastructure Policy at the Chamber. He also leads the Chamber's Americans for Transportation Mobility Coalition, which I think you guys are probably a member of. And he's a familiar face, I suspect, to this group. He has been at the Chamber for as long as I have, with a minor departure before returning, where and in between the two, he was the Governmental Affairs Director for AECOM, a big multinational engineering firm, for a few years before coming back. So Ed, thanks for being with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Moore, and good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well and staying safe. Too bad we're not with you in person, but glad to give you guys an update on some critical issues on the infrastructure front. I'll start by saying, if you don't know this, this is actually our Infrastructure Week 2020 starts today.
Yes. Yeah.
We're now United for Infrastructure, because some of you probably know that there's the pun, every week in Washington seems to be Infrastructure Week. We try to keep the message alive. I know you guys have been very active in these issues as well, so we appreciate that. But we're kicking off today at noon. Our CEO, Tom Donahue, is going to speak. I know that Congressman Clyburn is going to be speaking on Wednesday. So again, just another effort to kind of highlight the issue. And, your community knows very well the importance of infrastructure in, obviously in economic mobility, quality of life, the challenge of attracting high-skilled millennial workers to your community. And so we at the Chamber for the last several years have said we need to modernize our infrastructure. Dwight Eisenhower developed the interstate highway systems in the 50s and 60s. Teddy Roosevelt did the inland waterways in the 1915s, 1925. And so a lot of our infrastructure has reached its useful conclusion. We also know that we have kind of changed our economy a bit from when we built a lot of this infrastructure from a traditional brick and mortar to an e-commerce environment. And so, we believe that the private sector is ready to bring a lot of innovation and technology to the infrastructure debate so we can build 21st century infrastructure. And again, that just not includes roads and bridges, which are important and kind of the backbone for particularly our transportation networks, but also rural broadband and communities where there isn't a private sector interest. And obviously going through the pandemic we're dealing with right now, the importance of broadband access for every American. Wastewater, stormwater. I know the challenges in South Carolina with water and making sure that we have, updated water systems. Energy sector, pipelines, transmission grid. So we've been really making the big push at the federal level to do this because, again, while it's a shared responsibility between federal, state, local, the federal government has to take a leadership role. And some people may say, well, why is that? Well, if you go back to the Constitution, it only required the federal government to do two things. They may have wandered a bit beyond the two things that it required them to do, but the two things the Constitution requires the federal government to do is national defense and interstate commerce. And so we have been making that big push to get that federal effort. Over the last couple of years, obviously President Trump has been big on infrastructure. A lot of members on a bipartisan basis have been big on it. We had some meetings at the White House last year where the first meeting went very well. And they came out of the meeting and the president and congressional Democrats agreed on a $2 trillion infrastructure bill. Unfortunately, the second meeting started with the president saying that he could not get an infrastructure deal until Democrats stopped investigating him. Well, we saw where that led. So I think going into this year, we had pared back our expectations on a large infrastructure bill. And we really focus on a couple of basic things that is a core responsibility of Congress to do. The first is the reauthorization of our surface transportation programs. These are our roads, our bridges, our transit systems. They expire, those programs expire on September 30th without congressional action. Normally these bills are 5-year bills. And when the last bill got passed in 2015, a large stakeholder group that we are a big part of has been working to try to make sure that Congress addresses these issues in a long-term way, because as you can imagine, when you build large infrastructure projects, they take several years to plan and to get approval. And so we worked very hard with the Congress on a bipartisan basis to try to get that done. The House of Representatives early this year passed a bill that unfortunately wasn't going to get us there. because one, it was done on a partisan basis. So the Democratic leadership in the House put a bill together. And unfortunately, it left the Transportation Committee as a $494 billion surface transportation bill. By the time it got to the House floor, it became a $1.5 trillion bill. And again, a lot of things in there that I think the chamber wanted to be supportive of, but just not on a surface transportation bill, such as affordable housing, school construction. The moment the House passed that bill, and again, the bill was passed on a partisan basis, Mitch McConnell, the leader in the Senate, said the Senate was not going to take up a long-term bill. And so we want to work with Republicans and Democrats, but we understand that in divided government, there needs to be bipartisan solutions. So we're disappointed that here we are, that we're not going to get a long-term bill done by September 30th. We have joined with other stakeholders in kind of pivoting to three asks and three things that I'd ask you to help talk to your elected officials in the next couple of weeks. First is we want to have a 1-year extension of the surface bill, which is called the FAST Act. 1-year extension of that done by September 30th. What does 1 year do? So it's not long-term, but on the other hand, anything less than a year will provide uncertainty for like South Carolina DOT and other DOTs, and they will hold off, particularly on large projects. And we don't want to see any disruption in any transportation programs. Obviously, we're already dealing with disruption due to the pandemic. So 1 year extension of these surface programs. Number two is we need to get emergency relief funding to state departments of transportation and transit agencies that have lost funding through COVID-19. As you can imagine, a lot of revenues went down on a lot of these state transportation networks because a lot of them are either a fuel tax or a sales tax. And when we had the lockdowns, unfortunately, a lot of that revenue was lost. So we are urging Congress to approve emergency legislation to approve $37 billion for highway programs and $32 billion for transit programs. And again, I think there's bipartisan support. Traditionally, we would hope this would be in the next COVID relief bill, but unfortunately, we're not even sure there's going to be a COVID relief bill. So when you talk to your congressional delegation, we urge you to just tell them, get it done by September 30th. You all can figure out the legislative vehicles. We just need to get that emergency relief done. Otherwise, we're going to see disruption in these programs. And again, what does disruption in these programs mean? It means constructions might stop in midterm, so we might see increased congestion. It means delays that end up costing all of us as taxpayers money. And again, we're already dealing with enough here that we don't need that type of disruption. And then our final ask is to make sure that our Federal Highway Trust Fund has enough revenue to survive the next year. We haven't raised the revenue source for transportation programs since 1993, which is a fuel tax. 18.4 cents every time you fill your car up with gas goes into the Federal Highway Trust Fund. And so we need to make sure that in the short term, there's enough revenue in there to make sure we can keep the trust fund going for the next year. Otherwise, we're going to see, again, a slowdown in programs. So those are the three asks that we're asking our congressional delegation to do. Ask you to ask your congressional delegation to do. I think we're getting good feedback from both Republicans and Democrats, but again, like everything in Washington, until it's done, it's not done. So again, we'd ask you for your help in that. The other bill we're trying to get done, and I think we're making good progress, is the Water Resource Development Act. These are the Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works programs. These are our inland waterways, our environmental restoration of waterways. And again, the House passed a bill unanimously, bipartisan. So very much different than that surface bill I was talking earlier. This bill was passed the House on a bipartisan basis. There's conversations between the House and Senate, but just urging them to get it done by September 30th to ensure no disruption and we can actually move forward on water programs. So we have not gotten everything we needed in infrastructure. I like to use the analogy that we've made progress over the last 3.5 years. Using a football analogy, since it's so exciting to see football out there, we're in the red zone, and so we believe that after the elections, no matter who wins, that we still have an opportunity to get a broader infrastructure bill done. And so, we're going to keep pushing on that. In the meantime, let's get the 1 year extension of the surface bill. Let's get the water bill done. and then focus on getting that long-term bill done next year. So I will stop there and look forward to taking any questions you guys have.
Any questions for Ed from the group? You can throw them in the chat or unmute yourself. I've got one to start with, Ed, and that
Sure.
South Carolina spent $50 million of our CARES Act money on rural broadband, and then even more on hotspots for schools and for children like that. Where do we stand on some of that? I know that we're working on mapping. I know that was a big discussion at last year's conference out in Denver. Where do we stand on some of that? Because that's obviously critical infrastructure for this century.
Absolutely. And, I think Congress wants to deal with it. It's a question, again, of it was in the House HR 2, which is that infrastructure bill that I mentioned they passed earlier.
Yeah.
There's some talk about including it in either a continuing resolution or if we get a COVID relief bill. I think we're making progress, but like a lot of things, Jason, we still got a long way to go.
Yeah.
This isn't going to be an overnight thing. It's going to take a couple of years, but hopefully we can get some movement continuing forward by September 30th, because after September 30th, they're going to be pretty much gone. They won't come back till after the election. Depending on how the elections go, I know a lot of people think you get things done. They call it a lame duck session. We are not that optimistic that we're going to get anything of substance done. So we hate to wait till next year. But again, I think in the meantime, we had made some progress. Hopefully the CARES money was a down payment on a larger effort in this area moving forward.
Do we have any other questions for Ed? Ed, thank you, I believe. I don't know if we have any more questions from anybody.
Wow. Well, great. Hey, I appreciate all of your guys' support. I know infrastructure and transportation are big issues in your community, and appreciate your continued support. And obviously you talk to Moore a lot. Let us know anything we can do to help you guys moving forward.
Great. Ed, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody.
Yep. Moore, thank you. I appreciate you stepping in to do some introductions and stuff for everybody today.
Well, you're most welcome, Jason. Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for all you do with us and for us, and just enjoyed it very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Real quick, everyone, that's the end of day one. So I appreciate y'all sticking with us for this. Let me go run through real quick. I want to thank the Upstate Alliance as our presenting sponsor again. John is still on the call, I believe, although he's probably, he's turned his camera off, which is probably best for all of us. And then our presidential sponsors, again, BMW Plant Spartanburg, GSP, the Greenville Chamber, Nelson Mullins, Senate sponsors of Lockheed and One Spartanburg, Inc., and then the House sponsors, Blue Ridge and Greer. Real quick, let's talk. I want to discuss a little bit, about tomorrow. And I just messed that up. Let me do this real quick. Sorry about this. Tomorrow, we will start tomorrow, and we're going to do this early. It's going to start promptly at 8 a.m. And the reason for that is Congressman Timmons is out on his military duties right now. So he has a very limited window tomorrow morning. So if we can log on before 8, that'd be fantastic. He will speak to us from about 8 o'clock until about 8:20 or so, and then he has to get off. So we will have 5 of our 7 congressmen joining us tomorrow, which is great. That's pretty typical for us, and it's good to have so many. But Congressman Timmons, Norman, Duncan, Rice, and Cunningham will be joining us throughout the morning. So we'll start promptly at 8 a.m. And John, is there anything you want to close with?
Jason, I just want to thank you again for putting this all together today. I think it's been a great program, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to sponsor, and look forward to tomorrow.
Thanks, John. I will send an email to everyone with some more instructions